Hello, everybody. Welcome to a live edition of Around the Nation here on TYT Nation. I'm your host, Jeff Waldorf, with a lot of great stories today, bringing you a lot of great news today, stories from around the nation. That's where we get our name for the show. So, lots of interesting stories today, but I want to thank you first for stopping in here in the live stream. We do clip these things out too later, so if you do miss the show, we post all the clips on YouTube, so everything will be up tomorrow that we do today. Speaking of today, we've got some breaking news, some really important stories that broke today. We're going to cover those real quickly in the first segment. Then we've got lab-grown penises at the end of the show. That's interesting. We're going to get into a little bit of science. A little bit of news from Ferguson, latest developments going on there. Ebola, of course, that's some of the breaking news that we have there. And a bizarre couple with skeletons in their backyard. But that's not even the weird part. It gets weird. Kind of reminded me of the Boy Who Cried Wolf, except that there is an actual wolf, or in this case, skeletons. That'll be a fun story. But first, let's go to breaking news. I got a couple of stories here that have. I got a couple of stories here that are breaking as of today, as of when we're filming right now. First would be, of course, having to do with the gay marriage ruling or non-ruling yesterday. Now, very, very important here. On today, Wednesday, a Supreme Court Justice, Justice Kennedy, decided to temporarily block a lower court ruling that said that gay marriage is legal in Idaho and Nevada. So essentially those two states now have a stay on gay marriages. They were supposed to happen, but now they're not. Now, I talked about this yesterday, and I talked about how conservatives are like, oh my God, literally, oh my God, look at what's going on here. You're circumventing the rule of law, etc., etc. They're just basically whining and crying about, religious freedom, etc., etc. And how I thought, and basically, what I got into after all of that is that this ruling is paving the way for marriage equality all across the states. And that's something that they can't be stopped. Now, I still feel that way. Even after this ruling, I think that it's a temporary setback. Now, Kennedy's order, and this is according to the Associated Press, came Kennedy's order came a little more than an hour after Idaho on Wednesday filed an emergency request for an immediate stay. Now, the state's request said that without a stay, state and county officials would have been required to begin issuing marriage licenses to same-sex couples Wednesday morning. Oh, the shock, the horror of actually having to let gay people get married. That's horrible. Now, Idaho Governor Butch Otter said that, I'm so glad that you acted quickly to deny these people their rights to get married. Whew, boy, did we dodge a bullet there. Thanks, Kennedy. Yeah, thanks, Kennedy. He said, quote, I am pleased that Justice Kennedy has given us the opportunity to make our case in a way that helps avoid the confusion other states have faced. What confusion? Gay people could get married. What's confusing about that? Well, I guess people like Butch Otter are just confused at the fact that why would a man want to marry another man? Or why would a woman want to marry another woman? I don't get it. Well, that doesn't matter that you don't get it personally, because it's their right. Shouldn't matter if you understand or not, or confused. He said, quote, I intend to be faithful to my oath of office and keep working to protect the Idaho Constitution and the mandate of Idaho voters in support of traditional marriage. So that's essentially Governor Butch Otter has to say about this. Now, the thing about this is that it is a temporary stay. Once again, temporary setback, temporary stay. That does not mean that gay marriage will be stopped. It just does not mean that. It's still going to happen despite this temporary stay. Now, once again, yesterday I said that they could reverse the ruling. But this doesn't mean that they've done that. This is just an emergency stay. And they suspect in a few days, I suspect in a few days, that this stay will be lifted and gay marriages will begin in Idaho and Nevada. Once again, it's going to happen. And no matter how many emergency appeals and emergency stays that they try to implement in these states, it's not going to matter. It's going to happen. You can't stop the tide of progress. More breaking news. A little bit of news on Ebola. The first Ebola patient in America by the name of Thomas Eric Duncan died today due to the disease. Now, Mr. Duncan was staying in the Dallas hospital. He was being treated there for Ebola. They even tried some experimental medicine on him, and it didn't work. He ended up passing away this afternoon. Now, that's sad, but in the same... It's sad, but at the same time, it's sort of... I think everybody around is probably breathing a sigh of relief, since they no longer have to worry about somebody having Ebola being in the United States. Now, he was given the drug Brincidofovir, which is the experimental Ebola drug, but he had already been doing pretty poorly, according to the family, and the hospital had recently downgraded his condition from serious to critical. Now, Ebola is a pretty dangerous disease, so this isn't all surprising. It's dangerous, and it has a very high mortality rate. So, very serious disease. The experimental drug didn't work. He was in very poor condition, and he passed away. Once again, it's very sad. The hospital said, I'm sorry, Texas Health Resources spokesman Wendell Watson said, quote, "It is with profound sadness and heartfelt disappointment that we must inform you of the death of Thomas Eric Duncan this morning at 7:51 a.m. We have offered the family our support and condolences in this difficult time. Our deepest sympathies goes out to his father and family in Liberia and here in America. Eric was a wonderful man who showed compassion toward all." And this was from Duncan's girlfriend, Louise Tro. So once again, Michael Eric Duncan, or Thomas Eric Duncan, is dead. Now, once again, that's one less person in America that has Ebola, so everybody who's freaking out about Ebola can relax. All right. Now we go to the real news. That's breaking news. Now we go to the other news. All right. Just checking some things here. An Oregon man was robbed of his brand spanking new handgun last week by another armed man. Interesting. Portland station KPTV reported that the 21-year-old man purchased a small .22 caliber pistol earlier in the day and was openly carrying it while walking down the street with his cousin. They told investigators that another man had approached and had asked for a cigarette. Hey man, can I come and smoke with you? Now this man was probably around 19 to 23 years old, small spot, clean shaven, small, some hair on his, some facial hair, from what the description says, and wearing gray sweatpants. Now this man approached, asked for a smoke, and they sat around, they smoking and talking, got to chatting, and eventually started talking about the recent purchase. That's when this gentleman decided that, according to the police report, he decided to pull out his gun and said, "I like your gun. Give it to me." The set of balls on this guy. Now, KPTV reported that after he allegedly stole this man's brand new piece, the other gentleman fled and has yet to be found. Now, for me, this is why I think open carry is a terrible idea. It's just one of the reasons. Now, I can understand the logic, even if I don't agree with it, the logic behind concealed carry. You don't know who's armed, so you could assume everyone's armed. Now, it's a terrible worldview to live in, I think, in my opinion. You're like, oh my God, is this guy going to shoot me? Is this guy going to shoot me? Is this guy going to shoot me? Okay. Like I said, not the most friendly worldview. But I get it. That's the general idea behind concealed carry. I'm not advocating that for reasons I'm not going to get into here, because it's not about this. But open carry is a completely different animal. Open carry is brazen and stupid. And here's why. You're essentially advertising, hey, look at me and my shiny gun. You know I'm armed, and for some reason that's supposed to give you confidence that, hey, nobody's going to approach me. Well, this proves that wrong. This is one of those situations that proves otherwise. You're open carrying. Everybody can see your gun, but you don't know about the other guy who's concealed. And in this case, the guy who's concealed easily could have gotten the drop on this man, and he did. And he got a free pistol out of it. It's not very smart. It doesn't make any sense. I can understand that, oh, it's my Second Amendment right. I'm filled with pride to show off my gun, but practically, it's just not a smart idea. Now, the other thing, of course, is that openly carrying is a deterrent, right? Well, it didn't quite work as a deterrent in this case as well. And so I think the whole thing that I get from this entire case is that it's just filled with complete irony. It's nothing short of ironic. We move on. We have a progressive fight on our hands here. I'm a pretty big union supporter in general. The idea of people getting together and to collectively bargain with their employers for better wages, benefits, and etc. I think that that's fundamentally American. I'm a pretty pro-union guy. I think it also, unions democratize the workplace, and it generally helps to lift wages of everyone around. And there's empirical data to back that up. That being said, I find myself, ironically, opposing a union. Now, what in the world is going on here? Well, it's not so much opposing the union, but the recent actions of a union, specifically the United Mine Workers of America. Now, why would I oppose the union itself? Well, once again, it's not the union, it's their actions. What are they doing? Well, on Tuesday, they went to Washington to oppose the new EPA regulations on power plant emissions. Now, it makes sense. Mine workers, they normally mine coal. And coal, of course, goes into power plants. Those emissions, reducing emissions, reduces the viability of coal and therefore threatens their livelihood. I understand that. Now, UMWA Vice President, he told the crowd of about 700 people that, quote, "We are fighting for our livelihood. We have to let the president know. We need to let both parties know that we will support candidates that support us." And this is sort of where it's hard for me to be against these guys, because it is people's livelihood. It's their jobs. But then you have to look at the alternative. Now, these guys work in the coal industry, as I said. Coal just happens to be the dirtiest fossil fuel that we have, that we can burn. It's also the most dangerous. Mine work isn't easy. And if it's a choice between clean air and a few thousand jobs, I think the choice is obvious. Now, of course, with so many fellow progressives having that same mindset and attitude when it comes to coal, it understandably pisses off these guys. Especially since they've noted that they have supported progressive causes. Daniel Kane, UMWA Secretary-Treasurer, said just that. Quote, "We fought for those progressive causes, and there are people today in the progressive movement who have forgotten us." It's not that we have forgotten about you. It's that there's too much at stake if we don't take more action to curb climate change. Because to be honest, climate change is the single most important issue facing humanity at large in the 21st century. It's about perspective. You have to look at the bigger picture when it comes to these types of regulations. And I know that's easy for me to say, since it's not my job on the line. And I completely understand that. And I completely understand why people would try and protect their livelihood. It makes all the sense in the world. And that's why that's why it's so hard for me to come out against these guys. Because it's I understand them, and I understand where they're coming from, and I empathize with them, as much as it seems that I might not be. But there are some things that are more important. Now, here's some statements I want to read from the protesters, and this comes from the Huffington Post. UMWA President Cecil Roberts said, quote, "What is going on now is the EPA is passing laws, and we all have to abide by them. These rules could not pass a vote in the United States Congress." Now, the EPA has that power under the Clean Water Act. Okay, that's passed back in 1970. And the real fact of why Congress isn't passing these laws, well, in order to really answer that question, you have to look at why Congress isn't doing anything. And that, of course, has to be because of the Republicans and corporatist Democrats. Republicans hate the EPA. They want it disbanded, eliminated. Get rid of the EPA. We don't need no stinking regulation. Get rid of it. So, of course, it makes sense that they wouldn't allow any sort of updates on EPA rules to go through. So it's left to the EPA to make its own rules and pass those through on its own, under their authority, under the Clean Air Act. It makes sense. Now, Cecil Roberts continues. "These are the best jobs in Appalachia. No bureaucrat has the right to do this." Now, he also argued that the U.S. should not go forward with emissions regulations while countries like China don't have these limits in place. China's getting away with it. Why can't we? All right. For one, I hate this argument. That's sort of like a kid seeing another kid, person's kid getting a toy and saying, why can't I get one of those? Why can't I do it? Or they see another kid doing something wrong. Why can't I do that? Well, because you can't. It's wrong. But China can do it. China also routinely abuses human rights. Does that make that okay? I'm not comparing the two issues. They're not the same, but it's the same principle behind it. So let's get some more quotes. This comes from Mike Malerney. He was a 69-year-old retired miner from the local 1188 in Zanesville, Ohio. He said, quote, "If you shut down all the coal-fired power plants now, what would you use for electricity in the United States?" Well, that's a good question, but ultimately it's also a fallacy, because no one in their right mind would do that. I'm not advocating for that. I'm sure a lot of liberals are not advocating for that, if they know anything, because you can't just do that. There needs to be a transition period. Besides, the EPA says, quote, "Coal will remain a critical part of America's energy mix for the foreseeable future. In 2030, it will represent a third of our nation's energy mix." Now, I personally think that that's way too much. And I also think the proposed regulations on coal power plant emissions are a little too weak. They're on the weak side. But a lot of these miners mistakenly think that it's these regulations that are killing the coal industry. But it's really not. It's more economics. There are more economic factors at play than just regulation. There's also competition from different energy sources. For example, fracking. There's been a fracking boom. And that's just plummeted the price of coal. It plummeted the demand of coal, since natural gas is just cheaper. Anyway, what's really important about this, and what I want to touch on here, is what was said by the vice president of the UMWA a bit earlier in the story. He said, quote, "We need to let both parties know that we will support candidates that support us." And you know what that means? That means voting for Republicans and corporatist Democrats. For example, Allison Lundergan Grimes, Kentucky. She's running against Mitch McConnell. She is incredibly pro-coal. And it's not just her that's pro-coal. A lot of our politicians, even on the Democratic side, are pro-coal. For example, in the 2012 debates, debating with Mitt Romney, President Obama was attempting to be Mr. Coal. "Oh, I love coal." "What are you talking about?" "I love coal." Don't you guys love coal?" "I know I love coal. Vote for me." Both he and Romney were both unabashedly on the side of the coal industry. So let's get back to the workers. Once again, I sympathize with the workers. But at the same time, we simply can't do nothing while the climate continues to warm, just so we can keep around a few 100,000 jobs. History shows that new technology ends up destroying old industries. But at the same time, it creates new industries to take the place of those that are gone. I'm pretty sure the carriage industry felt the same way when the car was invented. And we got more jobs out of that. Old industries are replaced by new industries. And that's the way it's always worked. This will be the same thing. And besides, coal has also been in the downward slide for years now. Even without these regulations, demand for coal has plummeted. And automation has already cut into existing coal jobs anyway. So once again, it's not the regulation entirely. It's a mix of different things. New energy sources, automation, that's cutting into these coal jobs. New technology, everything. It's essentially a dying industry. And I think it's one that should die and be replaced by something better, cleaner, renewable, and can actually give people a safe work environment. We got to let the coal industry die before we can make something, so we can make something else, so we can do something better. And that's what we need to do. We got to move forward, even if it does hurt in the short term. In the long term, it's going to hurt a lot more if we don't do something about climate change. Go back to Ferguson here. All right. Police in Ferguson. Start that again. Fuck it. Do it live. Police in Ferguson, Missouri have been found to have violated the constitutional right of protesters supporting Michael Brown. Now, back in August, police officers overseeing security at the protests ended up violating the protest's constitutional rights by instituting something called the Keep Walking Rule. Now, what is this Keep Walking Rule? Well, this rule essentially barred people from congregating on public sidewalks, even in public daylight. Now, they said they didn't originally say that this was going to be enforced in the daylight, but it ended up being enforced. Now, let me go into this, and I go to the Huffington Post. According to the Huffington Post, Chief U.S. District Judge Catherine Perry held that the practice of requiring peaceful demonstrators and others to walk rather than stand still violates the Constitution. She issued a preliminary injunction banning St. Louis County Police and Missouri State Highway Patrol officers from using the tactic. So this is a good thing. I generally agree. I mean, people should have the right to protest and not have to keep moving. Quote, the evidence from plaintiff witnesses shows that the police, including some of those from St. Louis County, told many people who are either peacefully assembling or simply standing on their own that they would be arrested if they didn't keep moving. Some law enforcement officers told people that they could stand still for no more than 5 seconds. That's not even enough time to catch your breath. Others gave instructions that people were walking too slowly. Oh, you got to hurry it up. Faster, faster. Or that they could not walk back and forth in a small area. Sorry, no pacing. Some law enforcement officers did not make people keep moving. Others did. Some officers applied the strategy to reporters. Others did not. Many officers told people who were standing in small groups on the sidewalks during the daytime hours that they would be arrested if they did not keep moving. So, what I'm seeing here is a ununiform application of this so-called 5-second rule. So, it's very ununiform. I don't think these police knew what the hell they were doing, which makes sense in Ferguson. Now, the ruling from Judge Perry says that individuals who wish to gather, quote, in the wake of the Michael Brown's tragic death, have a constitutional right to do so. Yes, we have the freedom of assembly. She also noted that, quote, they do not have the right to endanger the lives of police officers or other citizens. Also correct. But she added that nothing in her order restricted the police officers to do their jobs. So no, they were not restricted from doing their jobs by this injunction. Now remember Captain Ron Johnson, right? Now he's went through and he calmed everything down, and he gets a lot of credit for that. But even Ron Johnson defended this practice by saying that this was not a violation of their rights. No, keep moving, keep moving. Now, as I said before, this wasn't supposed to be enforced in broad daylight. But since the officers weren't uniformly practicing this rule, they were doing it. Some were doing it, some weren't doing it. There was a lot of confusion on this. So I can understand where Ron Johnson was coming from. But still, I'm very glad that the judge disagreed with his statement and said, no, that is a clear violation. It doesn't matter what was intended. It is still a violation of these protesters' constitutional rights, and it needs to stop. And so thankfully, it has. This is an interesting story. It's very an interesting story. Recently, 2 North Carolina residents were arrested and charged with murder after the cops executed a search warrant that found the remains of 2 bodies buried in a couple's backyard. Interesting. Now, who's this couple? The couple is identified as Pazuzu Ila Algarad and Amber Nicole Birch. I compare those two names. One's a little weird, the other's pretty normal. Okay. Pazuzu is apparently not his real name. Oh, that clears things up. According to detective, the name Pazuzu means King of the Demons of the Wind. So we're talking about royalty here, apparently. Now it gets a little weirder. See, there's a former roommate of theirs who lived with them for approximately a month back in 2005. She told police that Algarad often bragged about killing 2 prostitutes, eating them, burning the rest in a fire pit, and burying the bones in the backyard. Okay. Now, this former roommate goes by the name of Bianca Heath, and she said, quote, Paz told everyone, but I never believed him. I'm sure no one else believed him either. He laughed about the skeletal remains when telling the story on why he did what he did. So he told a bunch of people. So he killed these people, ate them, burned their remains, buried their bones, and then told everybody about it. Hey, I got 2 dead people in the backyard. But nobody believed them. Now, from this, I can see why she immediately moved out. A month there is a little too long. Gotta get the fuck out of there sooner. She continues, I never once saw the bodies. Honestly, I thought he was lying. Now I'm not sure what to believe. He also apparently told his family about it. And according to posts where he had posted on a message board, he had told everybody about it on this message board as well. That's got to be a weird conversation to be a part of. Oh yeah, hey, I got some bodies buried in the backyard. You want to see them? No? And everybody's like, oh, no, you don't have bodies back there. You're just fucking around. You're joking, right? No, seriously, they're back there. You can dig them up if you want. I'll pass. I'd rather not. And it's funny because it's not much of a stretch for this guy. Remember how he said that nobody believed him, right? Well, this isn't the only time that he's been tied to a murder. Apparently, he'd already been convicted as an accessory to murder for a shooting of a 30-year-old man named Joseph Chandler. And he was out on probation because of that. Fascinating story, man. There's some weird people out there. Now, odds are that now he's not going to be on probation anymore. Odds are he's going to probably be spending a lot of time in prison, which I think is for the best. Sorry, King of the Demon of the Wind. You're going to be the king of the jail cell. Enjoy. What do we got next? Good news for men. Apparently, if you lose your penis, you could get a replacement in the near future. Scientists at the Wake Forest Institute of Regenerative Medicine have been working on lab-grown replacement penises for men who need replacements due to genital defects, traumatic injuries, cancer, or even things like Lorena Bobbitt-style revenge. Okay. Now, men, of course, have received penile transplants before, but normally that involves getting one from a donor. That, of course, can lead to the body rejecting it, as with any transplants, and not to mention the different psychological factors involved with getting a transplant of anything. So, for example, according to The Guardian, a Chinese man, who was the very first man to get a donor penis transplanted, he ended up returning it later. It just wasn't working out for him. So what's different about this, and how does it work? Let me give you some details. According to Dr. James Yu, they take a donor penis, so there's still a donor involved, but they end up soaking it in a mild detergent to essentially get rid of some of the cells, or all the donor cells. Now this apparently takes a couple of weeks. So you soak this donor penis for a few weeks, and then you come back, and it's essentially an empty scaffold. It continues, quote, Now after you do that, you're left with a mostly collagen scaffold, a skeleton, if you like, that looks and feels just like the organ. Think of it like a building. If you remove all the furniture and the people, you're still left with the main structure of the building. Then you replace the tenants with new ones. That's the whole idea. It's just that the building is a penis and the tenants are cells. Alright, what's next? Well, the Guardian continues. The next step is to reseed the structure with the patient's own cells taken in a biopsy from salvageable tissue and grown in a culture. Smooth muscle cells, which relax during an erection to allow the vessels to dilate and the penis to fill with blood, are first. Followed by endothelial cells, which line the interior surface of blood and lymphatic vessels. When ready, the bioengineered penis is ready to be transplanted to the recipient. So that's a pretty long and involved process. No pun intended. Dr. Anthony Atala, leader of the project, said, quote, he hopes this technique will mitigate both immunological and psychological issues because his penises would be engineered using a patient's own cells. That makes sense. Of course, like I said, they had to get these cells off of the person who needs the transplant. So if you are wondering how you can get the penis cells off of someone who doesn't have one, you're in luck. He explains, quote, the phallus is actually much longer than you think. That's what I tell everybody. It goes all the way behind the pelvis, so no matter the extent of the damage, there's a high probability that there are salvageable cells. Interesting. So that's what makes this whole thing feasible, possible. So you can get those cells. Now, of course, there's still a lot of work to be done. This isn't a completed science. There's still a lot of research. There's still a lot of testing. But to date, he's grown, Dr. Atala, he's grown about half a dozen sets, test penises. Now, these will not be transplanted, but they will be undergoing various tests to see if they're be able to perform as they're supposed to. Dr. Atala hopes that they'll be able to do a first test on a person within about 5 years or so. But in the meantime, they also want to focus on the short-term goal of partial replacements, and of course growing specific parts to cure things like erectile dysfunction. So there are lots of possibilities with this, but there's also a lot of work to be done. And think about it. If they can grow and transplant such a complex item like a penis, imagine what else they could do in the future once they have this perfected. It's really, really kind of amazing the stuff that they have planned on the horizon for the future. And that's why I like to get hard for science. I know, I had to work it out. All right, that's all I have for you today here on Around the Nation. Short show, a lot of topics, so hopefully you enjoyed the show, and we'll tune in, of course, for tomorrow night for TYT Community, where I'll be hosting that show tomorrow. Make sure to tune in. Thank you, everyone, for watching here on the live stream. Of course, Facebook, Twitter. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, etc. Like our channel, subscribe, and of course, donate. patreon.com/TYTNation. And for that, I am Jeff Waldorf. This has been Around the Nation. I will see you guys tomorrow on TYT Community Live. Good night.